builders came to build that. Stanley's going to set off. Builders came to build the extension, and there used to be a big garage, roughly where you guys are now. So it came out of here to the roughly there, along there, and about halfway, probably halfway through the door. So that wall used to just continue all the way down to the garage. So it's been extended that way. But in 1996, when they pulled the old garage down and then started digging the foundation for that, we were digging this wall here, at the foundation trenches, this wall, we came across lots of skeletons. So the ones that were going to be inside, they pulled out, and they're now underneath the modern memorial next to Lord Dacre's tomb in the Saxon churchyard. And then shortly after that, we were called in because they were going to put some service trenches and everything through here, and they knew there were some more skeletons here. So we were called in September 96, and then we excavated this area here, about there to about there, and that's where the mass grave was. And there was a minimum number of, does anybody remember? 37, 38, by officially the book. That's a minimum number, so that's a minimum number of bones from any one individual will tell you there's at least 38 people there. Plus the ones that were excavated and put to the churchyard, we reckon it's probably about 20. So there's approximately 50 people in this grave that we know of. So we excavated these chaps here in 1996, and then it was all finished, constructed, backfilled. We wrote the book, did the TV programmes, we did the full Monty. That's why. Eh?
You've got the t-shirt.
Got the t-shirt. No, we haven't actually. Good point. So there's a point. So.
I'll write it down.
Right. Okay, there we go. So that's where we got to in 1996, and then in '98, Liz Verity, who used to own the hall, said that she was going to put a path right across the front of the lawn, a big oval lawn, put a big path across the middle of it, put a big urn in the centre. Do we want to go and excavate while we had the opportunity of trashing her lawn? So we said, of course we do. So we did an excavation across there. There was very little there, apart from at the other end, we found a wall. And I'll tell you which bit of the wall we found when we go back to that later, slightly later. This end, there was virtually nothing, apart from we found a human tooth. So either some builders knocked his tooth out, or it could be from more human remains that were somewhere else around the hall. But there was no signs of any burials, just one human tooth. So in 1999, this is how much we've been doing. 1999, we went onto Chapel Hill when we were filming the TV documentary, the first one called Blood Red Roses, and they paid for the excavation on top of Chapel Hill. And Liz says, yeah, it's okay, as long as you go up there you can excavate. So we went all the way to Chapel Hill, dug holes all across the top, and I'll take you there in a minute to show you where we excavated and what the results were. 1999, so in 2002 we were given the chance to excavate inside the cellar on the other end of this building, and we took the story was that somebody else took a wall down in the cellar and found human remains stacked up behind it, and then reburied them again, recovered them. That's in Andrew Boardman's book, and that he took that information from earlier documents that said there were human remains found associated with the cellar. So that was in 2002. 2002 we also asked Liz if we could excavate as close to this grave as possible, and the only place we could go there without trashing her lawn was here, underneath the window. So we did a small excavation. We took out roughly where the scaffolding is over there, took all that out, and underneath the window there was one human burial of an individual that was that much down, sticking out from underneath Towton Hall. So that was in 2002. Now, there was no obvious signs of trauma, but if you see one of the videos I did for YouTube, this guy had the most bow legs you could imagine. So he had legs like that, and he had rickets. And he was only a shortish chap, but he had rickets. And there was no obvious signs of trauma. So we didn't know whether that was a burial associated with the battle or not. That was in 2002. 2003, we asked Liz if we could excavate between the mass grave and the chap over there, which left that amount of room between the tree and the hall and the mass grave that was here. So we excavated down here where the concrete foundations had been for the garage, and when we excavated in 1996 we couldn't get underneath those concrete foundations, so they remained in situ. So Simon Richardson and I thought, if the concrete foundations are there, there's a burial there and there were burials here, what's the chances there might be some more burials underneath the concrete foundations? So we came here. One thing we didn't have was a jackhammer because the concrete foundations were about that deep. So we got a big wrecking bar that was about 6 foot that wide, and we hacked away for a whole day to chop through these foundations. And we finally got through them, lifted it up, and as soon as we lifted it up, glued to the bottom of the foundations were some foot bones, human foot bones. So we thought, aha, another one. So we cleaned up the whole of that trench where we pulled up all the concrete foundations. I think they stopped about here. So there are still concrete foundations that way. We pulled off these, and between there and the tree there was a single, sorry, no, hang on. Back there was a single inhumation. Again, similar alignment to that chap underneath the window, and again, half buried underneath the corner of Towton Hall. This one was slightly more, hang on a minute, about that there, visible down, so we had slightly more of him, so he had his legs, and unfortunately this bit was underneath the corner of the hall here. And as Liz didn't want us really to take the corner of the hall off, we had to leave him there. But unfortunately fortunately for us, underneath the corner of the foundation there was a hole, looked like a rabbit had been under it, but it wasn't. It was just a hole in the foundation. So we cleaned it all out and we put our hand in, and out comes the back of the occipital bone, that bit there, of a human skull. And it's the only bit of the top half of the burial obviously we could get to, and that human skull had evidence of sword weapon trauma on it. So that was definitely somebody who died in the battle. So we've got a mass grave here, we've got an individual there which was about as close as possible to the edge of the mass grave, but also between him and the mass grave, underneath the rest of the concrete foundations, there were other bits of human remains that we couldn't get to when we were digging in 1996. So we cleaned those out as well, and those are the bits that were under the concrete foundation we couldn't get to when we were digging down. So we managed to recover those as well. So now we've got 2 human burials and a mass grave. The mass grave, if you read the Blood Red Roses book, was not exactly higgledy-piggledy, but it wasn't the normal Christian burials, east-west normal layout, but those 2 were. So the most obvious thing is, if you think about this, we've got burials running along here, and we've got burials that sort of go underneath the walls here. So of course we wondered what is actually underneath the dining room. So we thought, well, we'll never know. And then one day we were talking to Liz Verity, and we just sort of were rambling, and we said, we wonder what's underneath your dining room. And she said, the immortal words, why don't you find out? So, excellent. So the next thing, we get some funding by the Royal Armouries, various other people, and we took her dining room apart, literally, took the floorboards off. We couldn't take the joists off because they ran underneath one of the internal walls. So we had to excavate on joists that were like 3 inches wide and that deep. We had to excavate between them underneath the floor, and it was about that far off the soil that would lay underneath the floor. And then we cleaned up huge amounts of dust and debris that obviously accumulates on a floor deposit for hundreds of years potentially. And as soon as we cleaned off the top layer of soil and well, more like plaster debris and rubbish, we came across the old ground surface, and the old ground surface had definitely been disturbed in an area on this your left, this end of the left. So remember that just inside, underneath the wall, there was a burial. Just the other side of the wall, inside the dining room, there was another burial, a complete individual. So we excavated him, and then to your left, next to him, there was a triple grave with 3 individuals in it. All of these chaps, the 4 of them, had very, very severe weapon trauma. And those obviously they've been, you might even have seen them. A couple of them been on display in the Yorkshire Museum and the Micklegate Bar Museum for the Richard III exhibition. So they have been out and about, and they've just come home. They've just come back to the assemblage, so they're all back together at once again for the first time in a long time. And so they are still under analysis. We're still getting all sorts of things done with the chaps. These chaps are going to end up being more famous than some of the big individuals.
Is that in Bradford you do?
At Bradford and in York as well. So we've got several individuals here. Now we've got another, not just a mass grave, but we've got a triple grave underneath the dining room. All of which, apart from the young chap who stuck out underneath the window, all of which have got severe weapon trauma. So we know, generally speaking, that these individuals were killed on the 29th of March 1461, almost certainly in the afternoon, which is pretty good going for dating human remains, or any archaeological remains, to be honest. Right, so what we did then was, of course, what we always wanted to do since day one when we came here is put all this into some sort of context, because when I first arrived here in September 1996, I apologise for this, I'd never even heard of the Battle of Towton, because I'm from Lancashire, so we don't know about these sort of things. I know. So I was surprised that there'd been a battle so close to here, and never even heard about it. Then I was even more surprised it was supposed to be the biggest battle ever fought in Britain. So I thought, well, that's a bit amazing. Why don't we ever know about this? So I started doing some background reading. Very little is known about this battle generally, and what is known is all over the place. People talk about all sorts of different interpretations, what went on. So I thought, well, fair enough, we'll do some more research. So while we're doing the research for this, the excavation of the grave, the background for the grave, I started doing a PhD in 1997 on the actual archaeology of the battlefield itself. And that's why this lunacy started, because I'm still doing it. Anyway, so that's where we are in terms of the human remains of what started this. Since then, I've been doing geophysical survey on the battlefield, all over the battlefield. We've been finding all sorts of things, but the most important find, obviously, is in 2003, I think, 2004. You remember this, Graham? We did a trial trench when we found some. We were doing some geophysics on one of the surveys, and we found a distal ulna from the lower half of somebody's arm on the surface, and then we found 2 human teeth and a finger bone in approximately the same place. So we marked where we found all these things. We did a trial trench 4 metre by 1 metre, and right in the middle of the trench, exactly where the 2 teeth had come from, we came down about that far, and there was just human remains everywhere.
You sent me on finger bone duty.
Yeah. Poor old Graham sieved most of the remains. He volunteered off, so it was his own fault.
385 I might have.
So we excavated this trench, and it was about a test pit in the middle of this 4-metre trench, and it was just full of human remains. But the most important thing was they were all disarticulated. So you got areas, sections of spine, you had almost complete hands, almost complete feet, and there were very, very few long bones or there were fragments of skull, but nothing of any size. Apart from we found another radius and an ulna, didn't we? An arm. Yeah, and an orbit for an eye and all sorts of bits and pieces. So we know then that we'd found the very edge. All these human remains were on a sloping, inside of a sloping pit. So we knew that we found a mass grave. Now these are the graves that we know exactly where they are, and these are the graves that were emptied on the orders of Richard III in 1484. And what they'd done is they got a grant from the king, and somebody went along to the Hun gates and said, excuse me, will you go and tidy up our graves, take all the human remains out and put them in Saxton Church, and this is a long way of getting to where we are today, both in Saxton Church and also in the chapel at Towton. So those human remains were taken out of those mass graves. Some of them, the majority I presume, were put into the mass graves. We think we know where those are now, where they've been reburied in Saxton graveyard, but some were supposed to have been brought back here to the chapel. The chapel was going to be renovated because there was already one here. If there was one here, it almost certainly would have had some consecrated ground next to it where you would put burials. We have the burials, and since then we've been looking for the chapel. So now we start on the journey of looking for the chapel itself. So 1999 we started to look on Chapel Hill. So what I suggest we do now is if we go round the back, we're going to be very careful as we go past there's lots of building work and everything, so please watch your feet, watch what you're doing, and then we'll go down the garden and I'll show you where we excavated at the back, and then I'll tell you what was going on there and what we found as well. And then we'll come back here and I'll tell you what we found in the excavation. We all alright with that? Any questions before we go?
You think there's more remains under the hall?
Almost certainly. Don't tell Michael. I'd be very surprised if there isn't. And potentially under your feet as well, we don't know.
Has he got another room he wants digging up?
Yeah, that'd be nice. No, he's already just put his floors down. I did inquire before he did put the floors down. Right, so we go around the back. If you follow me, please be really careful. There's things above your head and everything.